Yo, what's up, everyone? The settings I'm using, I'm going to put in the description, like, right away, so you don't have to watch the video at all. I don't personally care if you give me any of the watch time. I'm literally doing this to try to get these settings out there, but the video is going to explain why I came to this point and what's going on with them and why I pick certain things and what you can do at home for your setup and what you might want to do with these. But this is, in my opinion, probably the best overall settings you can pick to actually hit 60 FPS with Tekken 8 on the Steam Deck if you're docking it. I know this is a very specific thing, but yeah, take the settings, go. I literally do not care. This video is being made out of pure spite right now. Okay, so joking aside, if you want to stick around, I will explain how I came to the settings I'm using, why I'm using them, and kind of the journey to get to this point, because yes, this was a legitimate journey to get to this point. Okay, so here's the dealio. Here's the dealio. I am someone who is incredibly competitive about fighting games. I play them very seriously. But I love portable hardware. I love the Steam Deck. I use the Steam Deck more than my desktop at this point. So I want to find good settings for Tekken 8 docked on the Steam Deck, because I'm also going to be using this, I used portable computers before I had a Steam Deck. I had the first generation Neo devices, and I used that to bring over to my friends' houses and stuff to like play fighting games and hook it up to the TV and stuff. And that's just, what I do. And most fighting games, at least maybe before like this year, were incredibly well optimized, in my opinion. That usually they were very easy to run. I will say it's still like under Night 2, because like technically speaking, it's still not much different than like the first one. It's like, and I mean like the first PS3 iteration of it, I think, which was also on the Vita. Under Night 2 runs beautifully on the Steam Deck. You want it to mess with anything, dock that to 4K TV, just set it to 4K. It doesn't actually render at 4K. It renders at 720p, but that's no matter what console you're playing on, no matter what, that game just runs at 720p internally. But it looks great, runs great. You literally don't have to mess with anything. I think I pulled up the performance metrics like once, and I'm like, okay, it's working great. And there's other stuff too that like DNF Dual, that works like great at like 1080p medium. I can look a little more at the settings because I finally got more storage space to start installing more stuff in my Steam Deck. So I probably want to benchmark things a little bit harder, but it's just, some things are just on the fly, like, hey, I think this will work, benchmark it for a second, and then it's something I might dig into a little bit later. But, so, before, I literally, like, just got Tekken 8, and I love fighting games. This game, so far from what I've played, this is a very good game, very fun fighting game. I love, like, the new heat mechanics, especially. So the new characters are great. Reina, I think that's how you pronounce it. Like, I thought I was just going to be playing Jun, since Jun came back since Tag 2. And then I played some Reina, because I'm like, I gotta try a new character. I'm like, oh man, this is super fun. So this game's super fun, but I want to play it on my Steam Deck. And here's the thing for me, and I'm sure there's some others out there like this, I do not want to play a fighting game with like a normal pad controller, so I'm not going to be playing this portably in that sense, but for the sense of taking this somewhere or just hooking it up to like a random monitor I have and just like playing on the couch or something, then yeah, like 100% I'm using this. But I do not play with normal controllers. I'm going to play every fighting game that's not like an arena fighter with an arcade stick. So like realistically, I'm going to be docking this all the time, because if I'm just like, because I tried this the other night, I was just playing some Under Night 2, and I just like hooked up my arcade stick to the Steam Deck and just kind of set the Steam Deck on a tray. And it's like, that screen's too small at that distance for me to like comfortably want to play something like that. So I have like a random 1080p monitor I use as like a secondary monitor and just use that for this kind of stuff. Eventually I'd like to get into those like portable monitors that you can just like kind of flip up and they're just like get powered by like either USB-C or other things like that. Point being, I'm going to be docking this, literally probably the entire time I'm playing it. So I want to find good dock settings. So before I got this, I like to be a well-informed customer. I watch everything the Digital Foundry does if I'm about to buy a game and see what they say, because especially since they talk about the Steam Deck a lot, and understandably so, they talk about like portable play, which is totally understandable, and their settings for portable play is probably fine. I can't remember if they were actually hitting 60 all the time. If they weren't, this is going to be the one time I'm going to say do not listen to Digital Foundry, but like I'm sure they probably would have actually tried to hit the frame rate. Because, like, they definitely 100% know what they're talking about more than anybody, any other channel or anything. But yeah, I'm in the very specific situation that I want to play this docked and have good settings. So I watched that, but they were only talking about portable play, so I'm like, I could make a baseline off of that, but it's still not quite helpful, because I'm not targeting the 800p screen, I'm targeting a 4K TV. Now, I'm not expecting 4K, don't get me wrong, but that's my main TV setup. But I also want this to be usable for people using like 1080p portable monitors. I know I've seen people do that. Maybe using like a 1440p computer monitor. I'm going to explain everything and why I'm doing it and how you can scale it to what you're doing. So this is for me on my TV right now with my arcade stick. So I read some like Reddit threads explaining what dock settings other people are using. I found like literally only 2 threads talking about this. And so I tried, like, both the settings that I found, and, like, not to, like, throw shade at the people that made these, because, like, if they're having fun and these settings are working out for them, that's fine, but, like I said, this video is being made out of spite, because I tried both the settings I saw, and I'm like, this is terrible. It's like, I was getting drops into the 50s, and, it still didn't look great. It, like, honestly didn't. So that's one thing, get that out of the way with right now. No matter what you're going to do, this game is incredibly heavy. It is not going to look super pretty or anything on the Steam Deck. Honestly, I was having a little trouble with it even on my desktop. I definitely have to use upscaling and stuff, which, I mean, everything's upscaling with this game. You can't run it at native res, but I mean, actually had to, benchmark things to real, which I almost never do with my desktop. So this game's really heavy. You're not going to be getting some native res super nice experience on the Steam Deck. But I want you to get an acceptable experience. But, please, for the love of God, have realistic expectations. Do not come into this video thinking I'm going to tell you how to get, something that would require, twice the Steam Deck's power. And it's going to be the most pristine, 1440p image. The console versions. On the Series X and PS5 aren't even hitting 4K most of the time. They're hitting 1440p if I'm remembering right. And that is one thing. I'm going to explain some things where I think this game should really have as far as settings you can change. Nobody's going to care. This game already sold 2 million copies. Nobody at Bandai Namco is going to watch my video and be like, oh, yeah, you know what, this guy's right. But I will still explain what would make a huge difference later on in the video. So this game's incredibly heavy. Please have realistic expectations. Don't be coming at me being like, oh, this is kind of blurry, or it's too artifacty, or I don't like such and such upscaling method. Straight up, too bad. If you want to play this game at 60 FPS, I benchmarked this thing for 4 hours. I'm not even kidding. Straight up, the day I got this, I barely played it. All I was doing was benchmarking this thing, trying to figure out what I can do compared to other people's settings, and it has been a nightmare, honestly, trying to get this to run in a way that I would find acceptable. And, I have a very high tolerance for lower resolutions and using upscalers and stuff like that. But, this has been a battle for me to try to get this to be okay. So, here's the thing. Settings I found online, they are dropping too hard on the heavier stages. And I think the problem is some people are they're getting it. I'm just making assumptions, because there's not enough information about this online. I think some people are probably maybe testing lighter stages without realizing it, and then they're getting good settings, and then they're just calling it there. This is what I do for everything. I want it to be able to run at my target frame rate all the time, no matter what. I don't want to be making adjustments depending on what stage I'm playing at or anything like that. I'm going to set the settings once, and then I'm going to forget about them. That's why I will benchmark something for an hour. I will figure out exactly how something needs to run. That way I never have to touch it again. So that's kind of the deal. There are some stages that you may be able to push the resolution higher than I am, but I want something that you can go set it right now, and that you can play matches on any stage, and that you're not going to be getting slowdown. Because here's the thing. First of all, the fighting game, you will not be playing this at anything less than 60. And especially if you're playing online, that would be really crappy to do to other people, straight up. If you're dropping frames, please don't play this online with other people. Get your settings figured out. So when this game drops frames, it actually slows the game speed down. So unacceptable, completely unacceptable. The only time I may tolerate that is like during like the rage arts or something. But even then, I think my settings are pretty good. But after a certain point, after I benchmarked them, I just started playing the game for a little bit so I could actually play the game. So I didn't benchmark every single scenario. I'm one person just trying to play some Tekken. So, be reasonable. But this should actually get you good frame rate on the bad stages. Because, again, I'm not like throwing shade at anybody. But like, I'm losing my mind reading different settings, trying to understand why these people are calling it a lock 60. I know it's like a meme with the Steam Deck subreddit where people saying, "Oh, it's a lock 60," and then it's like they're getting dropped to like 40s. It's like no. Like I actually care about performance. Like, so there's like some video I saw that they're like docked all stages at 60 FPS, and like one of the stages was getting to like 52. I'm like, bro. I'm like, no, don't clickbait me like that. Like, no, I need to figure out some real stuff here. Okay, so what I'm doing is testing with what I think is the heaviest stage. Maybe I'm wrong. And I'm also testing on the LCD Steam Deck. And if I'm understanding right, the OLED is like slightly more powerful. So if you could do me a favor, if you have one, if you watch this video, if you have an OLED, test my settings with maybe like 5% more resolution and see if you can still maintain the frame rate. Because that's my assumption as what you could probably do, but like I can't test that. I only have one Steam Deck, I'm not like I don't have that much to throw around. So, but yeah, if you have an OLED and you feel like testing that, please do. If you're getting any drops, I don't want new settings. Straight up, not to be rude. I just really don't. But I want people to have OLEDs to maybe get a better understanding. Maybe they could bump the resolution like by 5% or something. So, here's the thing. Targeting 4K TV, right? So, the upper bounds is our limit for anything. We're not hitting 4K. But, okay. First of all, in case you don't know how to do this, if you're using the Steam Deck docked, because there's a lot of games you can run above 720p, or 800p rather, there's a lot of games you can get away with more. So when you dock it, you don't want to be stuck to just 720p. So as long as I don't think this will dox any info of mine. So say you go to, we're gonna go home. All right, we're gonna go Tekken 8, and then we're gonna go to the settings right here, right? So go to settings, go to properties, game resolution. Change this to whatever makes the most sense for you. I believe this affect. I think this affects both docked and undocked. If you wanted to run something at like 1080p just for like super sampling, I believe this does it, but I usually just leave it at native. That way it's targeting whatever I'm plugging into, and then I'll adjust it from there. There are scenarios where this doesn't make sense. Say you're trying to use like the Steam OS's built-in FSR upscaling or NIS upscaling. Some games with their behavior, they might be outputting something that is telling the Steam Deck it's running at 4K or like running at native resolution when it's like not, because you're setting the internal resolution lower. So there's something like, I think I was trying to use FSR upscaling with one of like the Atelier games, and even though I'm running the game at like 1080p, it's picking it up as like, oh, I'm already hitting native res, because that's probably what the game's just like outputting as like a signal, even though I'm not. So then in those scenarios, you might want to say, oh, I'm actually running at 1080p, or what? Where is 1080p? Oh, am I blind? I am. So then you might actually want to set it to 1080p if you're on a 4K display, or 1080 if you're on a 1440 display. And then you could say, okay, then the game's actually sending a 1080 signal, and then you could use FSR upscaling in that scenario. So set your game resolution to, whatever display makes sense for you, right? So just in case you didn't know how to do that. So now in that case, let's get back to the actual game. Resume game. Yes, thank you. Okay, so graphic setting. So full screen, whatever, just leave it at that. Okay, we're picking 900p for a reason. First of all, I don't have the exact science on this, but I believe even trying to upscale to a higher resolution, even if your internal resolution is the same, I still think it will be slightly more taxing from what I've seen. I could be wrong about that. That could be placebo, but I believe if it's trying to target a lower resolution to upscale, that you're going to get better results. Whether that's through performance or it's not trying to upscale to an ungodly high resolution that it can't realistically upscale to. So VSync, leave that off. Most fighting games, you do not want to play with VSync anyways. I've noticed no tearing with this. The other thing you want to make sure you're doing, so if we pull up our quick settings here, you can do this on controllers by pressing like A and home or X and home or whatever, depending on whatever controller you're using, or just press the 3 dots on the side of the Steam Deck. So if we go to your performance metrics here, make sure that you allow tearing just so you have less input lag. Like, I have never had a problem with doing that. Don't be clicking things that you don't understand. I'm just telling you for right now, and don't be trying to add extra FSR or NIS upscaling on top of the low resolution. Leave it at auto for Tekken 8. For games, if you're playing something like the 2D Bloodstained games, or you're playing like Binding of Isaac, do pixel filtering. Pixel filtering, maybe it's integer that I'm looking for. I don't remember exactly what I left it for Binding of Isaac, but use pixel filtering. So a lot of the times, the built-in FSR upscaling will introduce bad frame pacing, I've noticed. So for the most part, there's usually not a scenario in which you want to use that, unfortunately for my testing. But just keep in mind, and you can always see if you're actually accidentally using FSR, because you can look at the FSR part of your performance metrics there and see that it's off. And we'll be going back to the performance metrics later. So for now, allow tearing. Just leave this at 60 or disable frame limit either way, but don't try to like limit this frame rate. Don't try to like target 30 FPS. You're going to be running the game at half speed, and don't play a fighting game at 30 FPS. I just want to make sure that everything's, do not be setting a TDP limit. We are not worried about power when we're docked. This is not about what you're going to do portably. There's much more information about what you want to do portably. Manual GPU clock. There are some games this really benefits if they're not programmed in the best ways. There is stuff like, I know this is a random example, it's just stuff that I have that I play. If you take Gus's other games, the Blue Reflection game, like the first Blue Reflection rather, because I like Atelier stuff, I wanted to play Blue Reflection. That game's PC port, the first one, it's absolutely awful. It is so ungodly unoptimized. Like, it's, it's a fine enough game. It's whatever. But, like, if you're, like, the PC port is terrible. There's no cloud saving either, which is really annoying. So, for, like, especially no cloud saving games, even if they run kind of poor, I just want to play them on the Steam Deck and stop transferring my save files back and forth. So for games like that, setting, like, your manual GPU clock to 1600 megahertz so it stays there is a good idea. But do not do this with every game, even if you think, oh, like, if I just constantly have the GPU clock max, it should help performance. No, it actually doesn't, because then you might run into other bottlenecks, and I've noticed, too, with stuff like, I'm like 60 hours into Yakuza 8, or, Like a Dragon, Infinite Wealth, and manual GPU clocks tend to make the frame rates worse, surprisingly, even when you're hitting, like, GPU limitations. That game's a whole other problem in a nutshell, but I finally got some settings I'm happy with docked. But we're not talking about Like a Dragon right now, so do not use a manual GPU clock for Tekken. So we'll get back to the performance overlay in a second. I just want to make sure you understand what I'm doing 100%. Variable rate shading, leave that on. What this will do is that it'll prioritize certain parts of the screen for rendering at essentially like a higher settings. So leave that on, because then it will deprioritize different parts to give you slightly more performance. This is going to go to custom no matter what once you start adjusting things. Rendering scale 50. So yes, this is an incredibly low resolution. Do not get me wrong, but this is the upper limits of what you can do with my settings to actually hit 60. We're going to be using FSR 1. Using like FSR 2, like Ultra Performance, it looks way too bad for my opinion, and you're not getting enough of a performance gain to justify it. It looks like, I'm not going to mince words here, like I am the biggest defender of the Steam Deck and what it can do. I think this is an incredible piece of hardware. I love portable computers. Like I said, I had an Aya Neo before the Steam Deck even came out, the first generation models. I understand what portable computers can do, and I know what my expectations are, and I'm usually incredibly happy with the results I'm getting. Using stuff like FSR was a lifesaver on first generation Aya Neo devices, so I could actually punched above that thing's weight. I'm fine with FSR upscaling. I know a lot of people don't like the artifacting or the sharpening. And also, like, my opinion too, if you're playing something like Yakuza 8 or Infinite Wealth, do not be using sharpening with your upscaling. I think that's just going to muddy the image a lot, in my opinion. But you can't adjust sharpness if you're using FSR in this game, which I do think is a poor decision. I do think you should have all these options available to you. And for the people that don't want to tinker around so much, maybe just have the defaults have like a default sharpness preset instead of taking away control from us in order to be able to change it. So FSR 1 still lets you adjust the rendering scale. And trust me, I've been playing with TSR, TAAU. I was playing with the different FSR 2 options. You just straight up stick with FSR 1. Trust me, TSR is much better. It's greater. The performance cost is 100% not worth it. You're going to be at the rendering this at like 30% resolution of 900p in order to get TSR to work properly. And at that point, in my opinion, you're getting a much worse image. We want the rendering scale to be as high as it can possibly be. We need raw resolution right now as much as we possibly can get. So you may be wondering, okay, anti-aliasing quality low means none. That means there is no anti-aliasing happening. We don't have the headroom to be worrying about that. So shadow quality medium. There's a reason why we want to have this on. First of all, if you take it off, you can already see in the background how much less shading there is. And when you have shadow quality in low, the characters don't even have shadows during the gameplay. That's too much of a sacrifice for me, and I'll explain why in a second. Texture quality, low, keep it low. Effect quality, keep it low. Post-processing, keep it at medium. Or else, again, you're really starting to mess with the image quality too much. Background quality, low. And you can use the game's built-in display FPS stuff, but I would just stick with, if you're playing on Steam Deck, just stick with the actual SteamOS built-in GameScope stuff. GameScope's incredible. It tells you literally everything you need to know. So why am I keeping shadow quality and post-processing at medium when I'm talking about raw rendering resolution being the most important thing? The reason I'm doing this is because even if I turn both these to low, it doesn't cause enough of a performance headroom to even bump this up to 55 comfortably. It straight up doesn't. So these don't affect performance as much as you might think they do, and turning them off is not giving you the performance benefit that would be helpful enough to even bump up the resolution slightly. So that's why both these at medium, and you're still preserving the general art style of Tekken 8, which, normally I would be, okay, screw it, put it all at low, try to get a higher internal resolution. It's not happening. Maybe on an OLED, maybe then your headroom might allow you to do something a little more, but at that point, I would still recommend sticking both these on medium. Don't bother touching anything else. So, what is 50% of 900p? So, here's why I'm doing this. Alright, so the reason we're targeting 900p is, well, you can see the math up here. So, what is half of 900p? So we take 900, 0.50. There might be other way to do this math. I'm not a mathematician. And we're getting 450p. So 450p is in a terribly low resolution. Do not get me wrong. But that is the upper bound where you can still consistently actually hit 60 frames per second. So that's the reason I'm picking 900p, because we can very specifically get 450p. I'm not kidding when I'm telling you that I benchmarked this for hours. This is the number that you want. So, that's a reason why we're not going to pick, 1080p. So, say we want, what's times 0.45? 486. That's too high. I tested it. So, then we take 1080 again. Oh, jeez. We times that by 0.40. 432. We don't need to go that low. And you can't do anything in between. So, the only other option I can think of off the top of my head, if you take, obviously, 1800p is twice as much as 900p, as far as just, number, and then we take that by 25, 450. The only thing is, though, I didn't test this because of what I said earlier about trying to upscale the higher resolutions, and I don't know if even trying to render the HUD at 1800p would be enough to cause any sort of performance dip. So check that out if you want, but all my testing was done at 900p. But whatever you do, try Don't try. Whatever you do, hit 450p, no matter what you're doing. Like I said, portable play, that could be entirely different. That's up to you. There's probably better settings. You probably want to be using TSR portably, but I don't plan on playing this portably. So we want to hit 450p. There's how I'm doing the math to figure out what I'm trying to do. So yeah, 50% rendering scale, that's super low, and I completely understand that, but that is the balance that we're working within. So obviously, I don't want you to take my word for it. I 100% don't need you to do that. So what we're going to be doing, we're pulling up a performance overlay, right? Okay, so let's... Oh, man, it's hard to read where I'm at. Is this practice? Okay, this is practice. Well, you know what? We don't need all the CPU cores. There we go. So we're going to go to what I believe is the heaviest stage. Like I said, to be perfectly upfront, my capture card was like $30 on Amazon. I use it for like all my videos. Unfortunately, you will see drops that aren't actually happening, and that's the other reason why I'm going to have the performance overlay open. My capture card will drop frames even when it's just recording at 720p. This capture card is awful, but at the time, you know, that's what I got. Didn't know I was going to be doing YouTube for this long. I just want you to know that that's why you might see visual dips. Just watch the actual frame times, watch the actual frame rate, and then you can see what's actually going on. If, like I said, drops, that's my capture card. So, from my understanding, at first, I thought, like, one of these urban squares was the heaviest stage. And I'm trying to, like I said, I'm trying with other people's settings that I read online for docked play specifically. And I'm like, it's not great, because in some viewpoints of it, like when you first go into the stage, like that specific vantage point is dropping some frames, and then it's like you have to start sidestepping to bring the frame rate back up. And so then I was like, what about other stages? So I'm like, well, this looks like it might not be that heavy. I was wrong. This stage is also pretty heavy. So throughout all my testing, what seems to be the heaviest is, surprisingly, like this stage. I did not think... I thought maybe this being a little bit of a smaller, more closed-in thing, but maybe it's just all the background elements are really bogging down the performance of the stage. This, to me, seems to be the heaviest stage. So, like I said, my goal with this is that you set these settings and that you're getting actually 60 FPS in all these stages, right? Not just some of them, not dropping to 50, actually getting 60 FPS. So, the other thing I noticed this on my desktop too. We go into here. For whatever reason, even on my desktop, maybe other people are experiencing this. I thought I saw somebody say this. When you very first load into a level, there's frame drops, no matter what, even on my desktop. So, as you can see, already, we are actually hitting 60 in the stage. And from what I noticed with some of the other settings, I'd have to, like, sidestep and get a different viewpoint. But there is, like, about 8 frames or so, maybe more, of input lag looking through my capture card. So that's super cool. So we're not getting high-level fighting, right? I literally... Oh, this is genuinely awful. Oh my god. Oh, this is bad. This is so bad. So, as you see, we were actually getting 60 FPS here. This, you can actually play with this. How do I set the rate? I can set the rate right through training. I think you should even get some good settings in here. I don't know why the pause menu's dropping frames, but I'm really not concerned about that. I don't see why I would be, because that's the pause menu. You can't pause the game online. Okay, let us do... Am I blind? Where's... I am. It's because game scope's in the way. Okay, player range. Now, I was not testing player range, because I honestly wasn't thinking about it when I was testing, because these are just cinematic things. But let's see what happens when I try to do one of these. Okay, I don't know if that's like loading stutter specifically, what's going on with that, but I would say, because it's literally just like a cinematic thing, that's going to be within an acceptable bounds of... And I saw like one more drop there. Some of these drops, I don't necessarily understand why it's happening, but I really don't think dropping it by the extra 5% is going to be worth it. Like, I'm honestly surprised I saw a drop there, I'll be straight up, because in my testing, I didn't see any. So I'm not, I like genuinely, the settings I found online, they were not hitting 60 like this, like at all. I don't think you're going to be interrupting somebody's game if you're running it at this frame rate. There was one singular like drop there compared to what I was seeing online, where you were like running at 50 FPS in this stage. It was ridiculous. So again, like, I'm not saying it looks great, but this is probably the best visuals you can get, best visual presentation, best resolution, while actually hitting 60. I tried, like I said, with the other dock settings, and I'm dropping to the 50s, and so the game's running like, I forgot, I did the math of this, but it's running like 20% slower or so. Unacceptable, completely unacceptable. So let me go to stage select just to make sure that I'm not, you know, like full of hot air here. Now, I can't remember if people say the evening or the daytime version's more taxing of Urban Square, but Urban almost looks like it has more going on. So we're gonna load up. To make this clear too, this is on an internal SSD. It's I believe the company was Micron that made these. It's a 2 terabyte SSD. It's the same M2 slot and stuff that the normal Steam Deck takes. This is not on my SD card. That shouldn't affect performance. It would affect loading, and it may affect like that beginning stutter, I think, is it trying to load textures and stuff in. But like I said, I was getting that on my desktop. I really think this game just needs to actually have the loading screen for like a second longer. Or maybe during normal matches, you're not going to get this because the intro is playing. Okay, so again, when I was testing people's settings online, I was getting like 55 with this like exact viewpoint with everything going on in the background. But we're not getting 58. That's not, I'll be honest, that's not quite as good as I thought. But then something else I noticed too is that there seems to be a slight discrepancy with what the game is counting as a frame rate and what GameScope is counting. I feel like GameScope is a little more unfavorable with what it was saying the frame rate was compared to what Tekken itself was saying the frame rate is, but I don't feel like it's clickbaity to say that this is playing at 60 and you're not having to like sidestep to get a certain vantage point to play this at 60. Like, this is hitting 60. And like, I do think this, as far as your resolution and your settings, this is the best you're going to get. And I am a snob about frame rate in fighting games. This does not bother me. I actually think any small amount of hitching is within an acceptable bounds. I really genuinely think so. So I think you can actually hit 60 like this. But there is some things that I wish it could do a little better. So here's the other thing. I know some people might say, like, oh, you should set like the UMA buffer size, if I'm thinking that's the right acronym, to like 4 gigs or something. So if we pull up this more, because I'm blind, I'm trying to stare through my OBS display, we are using 4.3 gigs of VRAM. That wouldn't matter. We're already going above 4 gigs. So changing that will not make a difference. And then, okay, to prove a point, so say, because I can't really make it drop on purpose, but I might be able to drop the frame by, so right now, like, look at our GPU clock. We're sitting at about 1,000 megahertz. We're still hitting 60 though. But if we go down to manual GPU clock, okay, I was trying to prove a point. I swear, I was getting worse performance by turning this on, with other people's settings at least. But I think it's because I'm already not dropping frames to begin with. But leave that off. You will get better performance with this game. Trust me, for my testing, I guess I can't replicate everything I was doing online. But to me, like I said, this is actually hitting the target frame rate that we want to hit. Honestly, like I said, I thought there was a tiny bit less drops than there were. But I guess at a certain point, I'm even being a little unreasonable, because if you're playing the game, you don't have to worry about where you're staring as far as your viewpoint, and it's going to drop more frames because you're staring in a specific spot or something, you know? You can just play the game. So, yeah, see, because, like, that happens sometimes. It went down a tiny bit, and then immediately went back up. I don't exactly know what would be causing that, and I don't think when I was testing it, it's to the point where I can just drop the resolution by 5% more and make those drops go away. I don't know exactly what's causing those drops, to be honest, because we're not even hitting, like, say, the full the 1600 megahertz of the GPU or something, and this doesn't seem to be a CPU limitation. So there are some things like that where I think like this is the best it's going to get. But again, I'm not trying to be clickbaity. I really genuinely think this is acceptable. I thought it was a little bit better, but this is way more acceptable than the targets I was seeing online for people dock. Like I don't know how they were playing the game. Like they were talking about, oh, like this is like perfect dock settings or whatever, and it's like this stage was running at like 50 FPS. Like that is not acceptable. And honestly, it did not look like any better than what I'm doing here. So here's the thing with this. So I suppose we don't need the performance overlay anymore because the video is pretty much done. I just want to talk about if anybody gave a crap, what could improve our performance here a little bit more. So I got a very, very specific example for this. So, like I said, I had the first generation INEO devices. I use portable computers all the time to bring them to different places, to play some fighting games, to do all this kind of stuff with. I'm a big fan of the King of Fighters, so obviously I've played a lot of King of Fighters 15. Love that game. Before a certain update, that game's performance on like anything that like wasn't my desktop was horrendous. No joke. I'm like the first generation INEO devices are. I don't know if I'd want to say it's significantly weaker than a Steam Deck, but it's quite a bit weaker. So when I would dock KOF 15 in order to actually hit 60 FPS in all the stages, including like the penultimate stage, like the second to last stage, there's like a lot of effects and stuff in the background that bogged the frame rate down really bad. Literally, I remember, I think I settled on running the game at 360p to get good performance, and at that point, I kind of just didn't play KOF 15 with my portable computer. I just straight up didn't, because like that was unacceptable. Some stages, I could hit 720p, and I'd be fine. And then other stages, I was hitting, like, I had to run at 360p to get 60 FPS. So then at a certain point in the update, I don't even know if they really announced this in the patch notes super well or anything, or made it really a prominent feature that they were advertising, but during one random patch, they added this like low resolution background setting, and literally I could run the game at 720p on my INEO on all the stages just by turning that on, not adjusting any other settings. And when you're running at 720p, I don't really care if the background's running at a lower resolution because I'm not going to be getting the benefit of any more of a populated background or higher resolution assets or anything in the background or better texture work in the background. It doesn't matter. I'm running at 720p. So I could get a way better native resolution out of that just by lowering the background resolution. And like I said, at that resolution, I didn't notice the difference because I also wasn't running the game at 360p anymore. So that's one of the biggest things that these background, like these stages in Tekken 8 so far, they're very visually pleasing. They're very nice. They did a lot of really good work with this. But there really needs to be a way to like farther lower the complexity of the backgrounds. The backgrounds, like I said, they're super nice, but I do not need them to be this detailed when my primary focus is still going to be the character models and actually hitting a good frame rate at a higher resolution. I would much rather have like half the backgrounds or like half the objects and stuff in the backgrounds and maybe like worse texture work, worse lighting and stuff like that if I could like bump up the resolution by another like 30% or something. I'm not saying this would be the way to go, but I remember very specifically, I don't know if it was Street Fighter Cross Tekken on the Vita 2, but I know with Ultimate Marvel vs. Capcom 3 on the Vita, and also Super Street Fighter 4 on the 3DS, what they did is the backgrounds just, there is no moving parts anymore. But honestly, especially when you're playing like UMVC 3, that game is so fast that I didn't really notice it. I'm too busy playing the game to worry about the fact that there's not like moving background elements. I'm not saying they need to go that far, but there really needs to be more of a control over how much density is in the backgrounds. I think this is just a guess, obviously, but I think it's eating up way more resources than it probably needs to be, and it's compromising the overall image more than it needs to be when you're using lower spec hardware. Because again, like, it's great with how complex the backgrounds are, even on low. That's like, they look great, like I said, but it's so heavy and taxing to the point where I think it's making the image overall worse because, again, it doesn't matter how how nice some of this background detail is if I have to run the game at 450p to get a good frame rate. To get a good frame rate, right? So I really think there should be a way to lower background density or something by a little bit. Like, there's a lot going on in the backgrounds. Like, we could definitely stand to lose a little bit of what's happening back here. Granted, I know Tekken's a very casual-oriented fighting game as far as probably who they're trying to sell to, in the sense that they need to sell copies. It's a fighting game. It's already not going to be the most popular thing in the world. I think a lot of casual players would like pretty stages and pretty character models and press some cool buttons and stuff. But I think there needs to be more control over how complex the backgrounds are compared to just the low settings. Honestly, I think like the low settings aren't low enough, or at least I feel like I don't have the greatest degree of control over how I want to render the image, or how I want the backgrounds to be in comparison or whatever. So to me, that's probably the biggest thing right now. And like I said, I also think, not that it will help performance, but I do wish that we could change the sharpness levels of the different upscalers, obviously. But yeah, I understand that there was no last-gen version, and that's probably the biggest hindrance right now, is that the lowest, not just lowest resolution, but the lowest presets of their assets are still like too high for the Steam Deck. And I get it, they're probably not necessarily trying to target the Steam Deck. You know, the industry needs and wants to move forward, but I don't think scalability hurts anything in the end, in the sense of the goal is to sell the most copies possible, and you can still have a huge upper limit while having a lower limit. If I look at something like, I know this is kind of cheating with like how magical it is performance-wise, but if I look at something like Doom Eternal, I'd say that has a really nice upper limit as far as like what I can run on my desktop. I can run it with like the ray tracing presets, everything on the highest settings. I can get like 144 frames per second. It's beautiful. But I also played it on the Switch. I was playing it, roughly like maybe 540p at 30 FPS, and with much lower settings than even the low on the PC. And honestly, on a handheld and stuff, that's still, like on a Switch, it was still good. And then there's still a very sweet middle ground when you're playing on something like a Steam Deck or an Neo or something. Now, granted, like I know not every company can invest in those kind of things. Not every company cares to invest in time and resources trying to optimize things to that type of degree. And that kind of leads into another problem where I don't think companies are spending enough time optimizing games anymore. And there is a huge amount of complexity in these newer games. Like any Unreal Engine 5 game I've seen, it has been really impressive and stuff. Like, do not get me wrong, and I'm not saying development's easy. None of this goes to the developers. This is all company and management decisions. That I think you would have better press if you had better optimization, straight up. And I do think good press would lead to more sales. I'm not saying by like an extravagant degree, but if somebody's like, hey, I can run this great on my Steam Deck, you're going to get more casuals picking this up, rather than if you're looking at Steam Deck settings for Tekken 8 and you see that you're setting the render scale to like 50, and it's like, that's not as good press, honestly. Like, I'm one who 100% understands the limitations of mobile hardware, 100%. I've been playing portable games since the Game Boy. I understand what mobile hardware and battery limitations, what precedent they set for my experiences. That being said, though, again, as a casual market, I'm seeing more and more people talk about Steam Decks in a very casual setting. You can go into some game retailers and buy Steam Decks, or even in the sense that there are people buying the ROG Allies, they're buying Lenovo's Legion Go's, and some people are buying Neo's devices. And I think even MSI is coming out with one like this year, current year. Not going to date this video too much. I think even though we've pretty much completely have moved away from last gen for the most part, and like everything's about current gen machines, I still think, like almost even now more so than before, there would be a decent reward for making sure that we can still target lower end hardware. It's not like targeting the last gen systems where there's a lot of CPU limitations. The CPUs in some of these modern portable computers are quite all right. Like, we're not going to be hitting the same CPU limitations as we were with last gen machines. And it's not like necessarily trying to target everything at 120 FPS and then we're hitting a CPU limitation. It's like, I'm more so talking about just trying to hit like 60 in a fighting game or 30 in some bigger budget open world game or something like that. Like, that's feasible. I do think it's feasible to be able to get a higher resolution out of the Steam Deck with this. It's just we need to be able to lower the density of the backgrounds by a fair margin, I think, or at least have the option to do so. Is that going to happen? No, there's no way that's going to happen. I feel like they sold a very comfortable number. I honestly doubt, as like a corporation, as a company, Bandai Namco is going to care at all. They sold what they needed to sell. People probably, a lot of people are probably just playing this on desktops or PS5 or Series X or whatever. But I still think there's a benefit to good press and the lower end hardware, especially in the sense of, you bring over your Steam Deck, you bring over your dock, and you play some fighting games with your friends, and you want the best experience possible within the limitations of your hardware. And I feel like this is not the best we could get out of this hardware, and that there's definitely a lack of scalability where I feel like we should have some of the options. So that ended up being a lot longer than I thought it was going to be, but I had a serious bone to pick with the dock configurations I was seeing online. So, like I said, if you've actually watched this video, I'm sure you understand where I'm coming from with this. I hope you can understand some of my viewpoints, and most of my videos aren't necessarily this technical and preachy, I guess, but I make a lot more normal videos, so stick around if you've enjoyed what I had to say. I'm not going to keep you any longer. I hope you enjoyed the video, and I will see you guys later.